Section 14, A Daughter of the Sioux. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Mike Venditti, MikeVenditti.com. A Daughter of the Sioux by General Charles King. Chapter 14, A Vanished Heroine. Within 48 hours of the coming of Trooper Kennedy with his rush dispatches to Fort Frayne, the actors in our little drama had become widely separated. Webb and his sturdy squadron, including Ray and such of his troops as still had mounts and no serious wounds, were marching straight on for the Dry Fork of the Powder. They were 200 fighting men, and although the Sioux had now 3 times that many, they had learned too much of the shooting powers of these seasoned troopers, and deemed it wise to avoid close contact. The Indian fights well, man for man, when fairly cornered, but at other times he is no true sportsman. He asks for odds of 10 to 1, as when he wiped out Custer on the greasy grass, or Fetterman at Fort Phil Kearny, as when he tackled the Gray Fox, General Crook, on the Rosebud and Sibley's little party among the pines of the Big Horn. Ray's plucky followers had shot viciously and emptied far too many saddles for Indian equanimity. It might be well in any event to let Webb's squadron through and wait for further accessions from the agencies at the southeast, or the big turbulent bands of Uncopapas and Minneconjous at Standing Rock, or the Cheyennes along the Yellowstone. So back went Lame Wolf and his braves, bearing Sabre with them, flitting northward again for the glorious country beyond the Chicadee, and on went Webb with Blake, Gregg, Ray, and their juniors, with Tracy to take care of such as might be wounded on the way, and later still the old post surgeon reached the Elk with guards and hospital attendants, and on the morrow began his homeward march with the dead and wounded, a sad and solemn little procession. Only 20 miles had he to go, but it took long hours, so few were the ambulances, so rough the crossings of the ravines, and not until near nightfall was the last of the wounded, Lieutenant Field, borne in the arms of pitying soldiers into the old post hospital, too far gone with fever, exhaustion, and some strong mental excitement to know or care that his strange plea had been perforce disregarded, to know or care later that the general himself, the commander they loved and trusted, was bending over him at dawn the following day, ordering forward all available troops from the line of the railway. The chief had stopped at Laramie only long enough for brief conference with the post commander. Then, bidding him come on with his cavalry, he pushed ahead for Frayne. It couldn't be a long campaign, perhaps, with winter close at hand, but it would be a lively one. Of all that the chief felt well assured. Now there was something uncanny about this outbreak on the part of the Sioux, and the general was puzzled. Up to September the Indians had been busy with the annual hunt. They were fat, well fed, prosperous, had got from the government pretty much everything that they could ask with any show of reason, and, so they said, had been promised more. The rows between the limited few of their young men and some bullies among the rustlers had been no more frequent or serious than on previous summers, when matters had been settled without resort to arms. But this year the very devil seemed to have got into the situation. Something, or probably somebody, said the general, had been stirring the Indians up, exciting, exhorting possibly, and almost the first thing the general did as he climbed stiffly out of his stout Concord wagon in the paling starlight of the early morning was to turn to Dade, now commanding the post, and say he should like, as soon as possible, to see Bill Hay. Meantime he wished to go in and look at the wounded. It was not yet 5 o'clock, but Dr. Waller was up and devoting himself to the needs of his patients, and Dade had coffee ready for the general and his single aide de camp. But not a sip would the general take until he had seen the stricken troopers. He knew Field by reputation, well and favorably. He had intimately known Field's father in the old days, in the old army, when they served together on the then wild Pacific shores where rolls the Oregon. The great Civil War had divided them. for Field had cast his soldier fortune with the seceding state. But all that was a thing of the past. Here was the son, a loyal soldier of the flag the father had again sworn allegiance to when he took his seat in the House of Representatives. The general thought highly of Field, and was sore troubled at his serious condition. He knew the dispatches would be coming from the far south when the telegraph line began the busy clicking of the morning. He was troubled to find the lad in high fever and to hear that he had been out of his head. He was more than troubled at the concern and something like confusion in the old doctor's face. "You don't think him dangerously wounded, do you?" he asked. "Not dangerously, General," was the reply. Well, he seems to have something on his mind, and more than this the doctor would not say. It was not for him to tell the chief what Webb had confided ere he left the post, that most of the currency for which Field was accountable was so much waste paper. Field lay muttering and tossing in restless misery, unconscious most of the time, and sleeping only when under the influence of a strong narcotic. Dade, with sadness and constraint apparent in his manner, hung back and did not enter the bare hospital room where, with only a steward in attendance, the young soldier lay. The doctor had gone with the general to the bedside, but the captain remained out of earshot at the door. First call to reveille was just sounding on the infantry bugles as the trio came forth. "I've sent for Hay already, General," Dade was saying, as they stood on the wooden veranda overlooking the valley of the murmuring river. "But will you not come now and have coffee? He can join us over at my quarters." Already, however, the orderly was hurrying back. They met him when not half-way over to the line of officers' quarters. The few men for duty in the two companies of infantry left to guard the post were gathering in little groups in front of their barracks, awaiting the sounding of the assembly. They knew the chief at a glance, and were curiously watching him as he went thoughtfully pacing across the parade by the side of the temporary commander. They saw the orderly coming almost at a run from the direction of the guardhouse, saw him halt and salute, evidently making some report, but they could not guess what made him so suddenly start and run at speed toward the southward bluff, the direction of the trader's corral and stables, while Captain Dade whirled about and signaled Sergeant Crabb of the cavalry left behind in charge of the few custodians of the troop barracks. Crabb, too, threw dignity to the winds and ran at the beck of his superior officer. "Have you two men who can ride hard a dozen miles or so and carry out their orders?" was the captain's sharp demand. "Certainly, sir," answered Crabb, professionally resentful that such questions should be asked of men of the cavalry. "Send two to report to me at once, mounted. Never mind breakfast." And by this time apparently the chief, the post commander, and possibly even the aide-de-camp had forgotten about the waiting coffee. They still stood where they had halted in the center of the parade. The doctor, coming from hospital, was signaled to and speedily joined them. The bugle sounded. The men mechanically formed ranks and answered to their names, all the while watching from the corner of their eyes the group of officers, now increased by two infantry subalterns, Lieutenants Bruce and Duncan, who raised their caps to the preoccupied general, such salutation being then a fashion, not a regulation of the service, and stood silently awaiting instructions, for something of consequence was surely at hand. Then the orderly again appeared, returning from his mission out of breath and speaking with difficulty. "Craps, I mean the Frenchman, sir, says it was after 4, perhaps half past, when they started, Pete drivin'. He didn't see who was in it. 'Twas the covered buckboard they took, sir, the best one." And then, little by little, it transpired that Hay, the post trader whom the general had need to see, had taken his departure by way of the Rawlins road, and without so much as a whisper of his purpose to any one. "I knew he had thought of going. He told Major Webb so," said Dave presently, "but that was before the outbreak assumed proportions. He had given up all ideas of it yesterday, and so told me." "Has anything happened to start him since then?" demanded the bearded general, after a moment's thought. Dade and the doctor looked into each other's eyes, and the latter turned away. It was not his affair. "Well, something has happened, General," was Dade's slow, constrained reply. "If you will step this way, I'll see you later, gentlemen. This to his subalterns. "I'll explain